Um, okay, so about your thesis process in general, um, can you explain how your thesis idea evolved during the thesis year? Like, what was the evolution from the first thoughts till the end?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just to like, I'll be really general at first, and then I'll step through a couple of specific examples.
Sure.
I felt that going in, I had no real clear final project in mind. I really went in with basically a clean slate of like what the final form is going to look like. But I came in with a number of things that I was interested in. While the summer I had gone to China and I had done a lot of humanitarian design efforts, but I'd also sat in on a couple talks and just gone to see some conference. Went to a couple conferences and then also sat in on a meeting at Carnegie Hall, which had a huge influence on the direction that I felt like I wanted to head in. And it was basically a meeting about music education. So I knew I was interested in at least researching or looking into, how is sound made, and what are ways that you could illustrate that to other people. So that's where I started. I basically went to the library and checked books out that dealt with any and everything that dealt with sound. And typically either sound production, like from engineering manuals and textbooks to, art, like pure art, like bio art type stuff. So, and just kind of just tried to take in as much as I possibly could, get influenced by as many pieces as possible. So that was the first stage. And then after that, it basically just became just an all-out make, like, just start creating as much as possible. Just churning out prototypes, one a day or, at least a couple a week, where they were just, oh, this was a cool idea. Let me just make something and based on it and see what happens. But,
Sure. Cool.
yeah. How's that for a general? That was
Yeah, perfect.
cool.
And how different it ended up being from what you imagined at the very beginning.
Well, I would say here I'm actually gonna pull something up. Like what I actually ended up with. At first I was really focused on thinking about how to use sound to learn about our everyday life. That's where I started, and I'm still, even contrary to what other people have said to me, I still believe that's where I ended up. Just it's not a purely instructional experience. It's more of an exploratory experience. I've in some of the critiques, that I had with people that run galleries and otherwise, they really like the idea, they really like the concept and the project, but they didn't see it as similar as I saw it, as like sound and how we can use that to understand everyday life. So that's where I started, and then I ended up with an instrument. That's really, and an installation. That's basically where I ended up. So to me, I feel like you can think about Henry Jenkins and his work on informal learning circles, and how it doesn't necessarily have to be out of a textbook or have to be something that was proven through scientific research. This can actually be something that you learn while doing something with others, and that you might bring that experience to other things that you do later in life, or even like later that day. So,
Sure. Cool. And what were the most important things that influenced uh, the idea and its evolution during this year? Do you have like any like some milestones or some key points that or things that were important as an influence?
okay, so influences that I would say I would almost separate them. Like
Okay.
like landmark events that just happened for me were I mean, I think this is a constant discussion point in our program, which is the idea of constant prototyping or iterative prototyping, iterative design. You know, being able to crank out not just one, but like 3 or 4 prototypes, maybe even in a day, became, for me, that was huge. You know, once I broke free of that, well, it doesn't do this or it doesn't look great. It just, when I turned that corner, that really changed how I worked on my project, because instead of feeling like I had to get this final piece and have that there and show it, I just started making like crazy. And it really was just, I can say it was one experience where I took spray paint and leftover scraps from the physical computing room, and I spray painted them, and I did a prototype in under 15 minutes, and it was anything and everything that I wanted the real thing to be. You know, only it didn't have any of the workings. Like, it didn't actually do it, but I could imagine it, and it let me explore that without having to have coded for weeks and weeks and weeks. So that's one. And then the other, I would say, you know, putting prototypes in front of people is one of the most valuable things that you can do in the thesis process. I mean, some people have opinions about this, but I feel the best way to do it is to put it in front of them and not really tell them what to do, but see how they respond to it, because you make discoveries constantly by not telling them what to do, or never tell them no, right? Just let them have at it and see what happens, because a lot is revealed in that process. So I hope that answers your question, but those are the two for me. They're not specific, you know, oh, it was a Thursday and the sun was shining. It's more like, it's more just like an idea, and that you're like, wow, you just turned that corner and now you can kind of just fly down that road. So.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was my next question, so I can skip it. In terms of the user testing you made, like how broad were your subjects of study? I mean, was it peers or what kinds of people?
I was super specific about who I wanted to have in front of it when I was prototyping. You know, I had an idea. You can think of it almost like a user scenario or a storyboard. I'm like, here are the people that I imagine using it. So I invited those people to use it. You know, I mean, the example would be at Maker Faire. I didn't imagine, you know, a mother holding a child up and like up over the top of it so they could move the pieces around. I didn't envision that, but now that's happening. So that's good. But I think early testing, I was super specific. I was like, I need a designer, I need a musician, I want an engineer, I want a scientist, I want an educator. You know, like those are the kind of, you can think of like silos of people. And I purposefully brought them in, invited them, you know, like get a huge sample, because everyone can't make it, you know, but, you know, I was lucky enough to have played music in New York for a while, so I knew a lot of musicians. You know, my brother works at NYU in the chemistry department, so I got a bunch of chemists, like a bunch of people that are traditional scientists, you know, or engineers. And you know, I go to a design school, so I had access to a lot of designers. So
sure. So you basically created one prototype for each one of these subjects, or you tested
I tested one prototype with all those people, and I got very different feedback from each of those groups. You know, you have to acknowledge, like, you really have to understand there are people that are going to view what you've done differently than you will.
Yeah.
However strange that might sound, you know, not everyone's going to see your piece the way you see it. So having an idea of the people you're sure you want to get feedback from. Because that's the other thing. I mean, you can part of the thesis process is this is your project. It's not anyone else's project. So it's up to you to decide which advice you accept and which advice you listen to, but that you end up not using or disregarding. I think that's the hardest part, transitioning, because the first year it's almost like, oh, this is the law. This is my professors know what they're talking about. They're telling me why I should or shouldn't do these certain things. In no way should you think about your project in that way. It's really up to you to decide, okay, that was a really useful piece of information. I'm going to carry that through to my project. Whereas there's going to be people that just don't get it. And you'll always, that's a good thing. If everyone liked it, you'd be making like Play-Doh. You wouldn't, it would be something that's just moldable and, nothing against Play-Doh, it's great. But I think not everyone's going to like it, and you just have to deal with it.
Perfect. So, well, my thesis and project is dealing a lot with collaboration in music or in sound. Like Scott gets so pissed off when I say music, and he says, no, that's not music, that's sound. He wants me to make that distinction. But
well, think about how would you define music? And this is like,
so subjective.
Because you can, you can go back, you ask John Cage what he thinks music. To me, I think a fair definition is organized sound. Those are two words that define the difference between a field recording, where you put a microphone in the woods, or there's an intent. Right? So thinking about what organized sound means.
Okay.
Now, if you took 10 field recordings and layered them over the top of each other, that would be organized sound. So now it's it's like this really gray area, but I think it being purposefully organized, even if it's disorganized sound being organized, it is then music.
Good.
Those two, organized sound.
So thinking about that in collaboration, the collaboration aspect was an important subject for your project. And how and why?
Okay. I think for me, one of the most important parts of music is the community that is around that. It's fun to work on, in your apartment on a song, but it's not necessarily, it's like the phrase, like, if a tree falls in the woods and no one hears it, doesn't make a sound. It's kind of, if you make all this music and no one hears it, what is it? It's not really doing anything. So for me, it was creating an environment where, number one, if you weren't a musician, you didn't feel like you couldn't do it. Like you see a guitar player and they can pick up a guitar, and you're just like, oh, I'm not a guitar player. I don't know how to do that. Whereas I want to create an environment where lower that a little bit, but that it's still challenging enough for musicians and non-musicians to create. I think collaboration in general going forward is just super important in how we're going to be able to organize ourselves in the future, not just in music, but in general. A lot of people use the word cooperation, but collaboration and cooperation are totally different things. Like think about an assembly line, like Ford Motors, that when you put the fender on the car, right, that's cooperation, because if you do a good job, then the next person can do a good job. But collaboration is something much deeper and richer that you're going to, like, your choice may enhance my entire experience well beyond anything that I could do. So to me, that subject is fun to investigate. And so to me, a musical instrument was a really great way to investigate collaboration.
Yeah.
And I TA'd a class last semester that was called Collaboration in and Beyond Music. And it was a class. It was a partnership between the New School for Social Research and the New School for Jazz. So Michael Schober, who's the dean of the New School for Social Research, and Dan Greenblatt, who's the director of the Jazz School. This was their class, and I was one TA, and they grabbed TAs from all these different departments. So they had a classical harpsichordist, they had a media studies, and they had a psychology PhD student, and then me.
Wow.
And so we were the TAs, and it was a ULEC, so it was a requirement for undergrads. And for me, that class it was awesome. Like, I looked forward to every class, and really, you can think about the whole crux of music, is that pairing of different instruments, or pairing of different rhythms, and really what you're talking about is two things working together, right? So, I mean, you can have one person play two different beats, but I think where the interesting things come out of, and partly why we were talking about jazz, is the introduction of new ideas or new directions. That can only really happen with more than one person. And so, yeah. I mean, thinking about how that works. I mean, basically, if you need any recommendations on readings or research, I have a serious amount of it. Right?
Yeah, totally. I'm gonna ask you for that. Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
So, last question is like, some time after the project is done, how do you evaluate your project, or is there any improvements you would make to the project right now, or how do you feel with some time of perspective?
Well, I think a project is never done. But I think that iteration of it is done, but that I'm going to take things from this project and do something different with it. I mean, the example would be, for Maker Faire, I showed that project that I showed at Thesis. But at the ACM conference, I'm going to alter it. I'm going to change it a little bit to actually follow up with some of the feedback and responses that I got both at Maker Faire, as well as that I received from ACM when I sent it in as a submission. So, and also just taking on new things that I've moved on to. After graduation, now you have time to actually read, enjoy, and investigate. I mean, not that you're not doing that now, but it's a different intensity level. But yeah, I would say, I don't know if you ever saw the image. Let me see if I can find it. It's going to take me a second, but I can show you an image that I used a lot, and basically it's like how I see the whole process, and it might take me a moment. Yeah, here. Let me pull this up here, because I think it's worth. Pictures are easier, and this is Scott will love. Scott is like, he's seen this a couple times, so I'll share this in a second. Okay, opening. Yes. Okay. Right. So, let me just get, okay. Okay. Can you see that? Let me see if I can.
Yeah.
Right. So you see, like, the chart is there's day one, and then like expires. So let me just go back one. So this is my thesis process. It's from day one to completion, right? So you have like ethnography research, then you form your network, then you have a discovery through this, and then you start working on your form, then prototyping, testing completion, and you just go around those loops and loops and loops and loops. So to me, these are all iterations. These are all like prototypes. As you move through each of those loops, it's like ways to think about, you know, you have to kill off a part of your project to move it forward and really progress it. And then this was the other slide, which I showed, like, this is my life's work, right? So to me, I see it as like a never-ending loop of prototypes and prototyping, if that makes any sense. So you know, you can stop, you know, caring about collaboration and sound, but the work that you've already done is going to influence the things that you do going forward. Right? So that's just as a little side note.
Yeah.
Right. So that's basically how I see it. I mean, I see it as like a way to like continually work through things. So like for me, John Cage is a massive influence, and you know, he talks a lot about what he's actually doing is not objects or final pieces, but what he's illustrating is process. And I am all on that, you know. So you can think about what I showed at the thesis show as, yeah, that's a final piece that was shown there, but you know, anything I do in the future will be influenced by the kind of stuff that I was researching.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
and last question. This is off the record. Any like golden phrase you want to share with me? Like any advice? Just one phrase.
are you familiar with the 10,000 hour rule?
No, what is that?
Okay, Malcolm Gladwell talks about outliers. And I don't know if you read any of Malcolm Gladwell, but the 10,000 hour rule is if you do anything for 10,000 hours, you're going to be good at it. So if you stand at the free throw line and you shoot free throws for 10,000 hours, you're going to make free throws. So
Okay.
the amount of time that you spend, every minute is going to matter, especially at the end. So yeah, that's my word of advice is, you know,
Cool.
Awesome. Well, good luck.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you so much.